Hello and welcome to the Health Check. You're watching this program on Togetherness Media. My name is Nikki and today we're going to talk about fat, the different types of them, what is fat, and how it affects our body and why our body cannot survive without them. So let's start with just explaining what the actual fat is. There's this stigma that fat is not good for you. It will increase the risk of heart disease. It has a lot of impact on our body. However, when we get to the bottom of it and when we open this topic, we see that there is a lot of factors that we have to consider when we're choosing our fat and to consider when we consume them. So let's first start with understanding the fat itself, what fat is generally. So fat is made out of molecules, and it's mainly made out of hydrogen and carbons, and the way the hydrogens and carbons are bonded together will determine the type of the fat. So we have unsaturated, saturated, and they're all like categorized in more details. Most of the fat that we need is made by our bodies, and everything is done in our body. However, there are type of fats that our body is not able to make them, and we need those molecules and fat from to outsource them and to receive them from consuming foods, as I mentioned, such as like that comes from seeds, from animal fats or animal products or vegetables and all of that. These fats are called essential fats, and without essential fat, our body is not able to function because half of our body's energy comes from fat. We are told that our energy comes from carbohydrates. However, we don't put enough focus and importance on fat. Our body, even like when we are active, our body, the first 20 minutes relies mostly solely on the energy that gets from carbohydrates or glycogens. However, after 20 minutes of our activity or whatever we're doing, even like our daily function, comes from our stored fat. So the way it is, we have only a limited capacity for storing carbohydrates in form of glycogen. However, we have unlimited capacity to store the fat cells in our fat tissues. So mainly our half of our bodily functions comes from this source, which is fat. These fats are called essential fats, as I mentioned, and two of the very, very essentials are omega-3 and omega-6. So omega-6, you can find them in a lot of fried food, in salad dressing, in a lot of like products that they're not necessarily healthy. However, it is very important to have the right ratio, taking basically the ratio of 4:1. So 4 comes from omega-6 and 1 from omega-3. However, normally speaking, people receive about ratio of like 16:1 in terms of omega-6 and omega-3. So they focus mostly on non-healthy food, for example, fried foods and dressings and everything that we can find in stores, and not as much on omega-3, which comes from tuna, salmon, and other sources. So again, there are a lot of studies that they talk in more depth about omega-6, omega-3, and how much we should consume them. And you guys can find it on Harvard studies and a lot of other useful studies. So we store fat. The way we use them is our body use the amount that it's needed, and then it will store it. As I mentioned, we have unlimited space to store the fatty cells. I mean, we have unlimited fatty tissues that we can store fat in them. So when we need energy from fat, our body will break down these tissues, and these fatty acid will easily go into the bloodstream. Unlike glucose, where it needs insulin, fatty cells doesn't need anything, and it goes through your bloodstream, and the hungry cells are able to absorb these fatty acids and use them as a source of energy. So that's why, as I said, our body mainly focuses on getting its energy from our stored fat, because we have only a limited stored glycogen capacity and unlimited sources of fatty acid and stored fat. So when we talk about fat, there are different categories. The main and two general categories are unsaturated fat and saturated fats. And as I mentioned earlier, it's about how the molecules are bonded together, how the carbon and hydrogen are bonded, like if they have single bonds or they have double bonds, or if there's curve in their structure and all of that, which I'm not going to get into it because it's a whole wide story, which hopefully one day we're going to talk about them. However, we know that, like, we are told that saturated fats are bad for us and unsaturated fats are good, and we should get our fats from that source. However, we haven't been told that why saturated fats are bad, and why we should be wise when choosing our fat source. Because if it was bad, if it was completely bad for us, our ancestors and people who basically lived years before us wouldn't have been alive if it was bad for them. So they never did any studies when they said that saturated fats are bad for us. But in recent studies, it shows that saturated fats are not fully bad for us, and we should consume them. However, it is very hard to say that, okay, it is good or it is bad. Saturated fats are, you can find them in sources like coconut oil, butter, ground beef, palm oil, and many other products. However, as I mentioned, it is very important that which source they're coming from, because if you can find them in margarine and butter, and you could also find them in coconut oil. There is, well, the benefits of coconut oil have been a little bit exaggerated, but obviously the fat that you get from coconut oil is much better than the fat that you receive from pies and pastries and that kind of source. So it is also very, because like all of the fats that we consume is made out of saturated and unsaturated fats, but it really depends on what percentage of it is made out of which, in order to choose which one is healthier and better for us and which one we should minimize. So this, as I mentioned, again, fats are categorized into saturated and unsaturated, and saturated fats are known to be bad for us. However, if we choose them right, we can consume them, and it's actually good for us because our body needs them, but in a moderate level and from the right source. The second category, which is unsaturated fats, are categorized again into three sub categories: trans fat, mono unsaturated fats, and poly unsaturated fats. So trans fat are, again, you can find trans fat as artificial trans fat and natural trans fat, which we want to avoid trans fat that are artificial, because they do like factories, and as the label itself explains, it's artificial and it's bad for our body. So we want to eliminate that. So we have to minimize the amount of trans fat we get, and we have to make sure that the trans fat that we receive is not coming from artificial trans fat, and it comes from whole foods, because as I mentioned, all fats are made out of unsaturated and saturated fats. So when you are choosing your fat, make sure it's not coming from artificial fat, and you have to always look at the label and make sure it's not artificially added to them. So we have to focus on unsaturated fat, which are mono, unsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats gives us like omega-6, omega-3, and we can find them in sunflower oil, we can find them in salmon, tuna, and many other ingredients such as seeds, and monounsaturated fats, we can get them from olive oil, from grape oil, from sesame oil, and healthier options. So avocados are a great source of monounsaturated fat, and these foods will give us essential fats in order for our body to work better. The health of our hair, our skin is dependent on them, and as I mentioned, it affects our nervous system, it protects our nerves, it helps with our development and growth, and that's why it's very important to be consumed in our diet. But we have to have a balance between the three macronutrients sources, and make sure that we include the right amount from each source in our diet. I hope you enjoyed this program. If you guys have any questions, please send us an email, and I will answer to your questions on our next program. Have a wonderful day, and this is Health Check.